So before I start, let me define exactly what I mean by hacker, as soon as I can get this. A hacker, in the sense I mean it, is not someone who'll steal your credit card number or your Facebook password on the internet. I mean hacker in the original sense. The hacker subculture has existed or has been using that word for at least 30 or 40 years, and regroups people who identify around a common set of values and traits. Hackers are curious, are creative, are imaginative, are absolutely free-minded. They do not take anything anyone says for the truth before they have been able to verify it. And the first assumption that is out there is computer are safe. So hackers initially try to challenge that assertion. Um, Hackers love to take apart and modify the behavior of things. So you may do something that has hack value, although it is not necessarily linked to computers. So if, for example, you've ever used a coffee machine to make tea, then strictly speaking, you are a hacker. Welcome to my world. So half an hour is a challenge to address such a topic. Few words about myself. Christian Michel introduced me very well. I got interested in computers very young, and in 1998 figured out how these skills that I had accumulated could be monetized. And Swiss banks, I happened to grow up in Switzerland. Swiss banks are very keen customers of such skills because, as you know, and as is even more the case right now, they are trying to protect secrets from a large bunch of people. And at the time, they were just introducing the internet in their offices and were very keen, very curious as to the flaws that would mean governments, intelligence agencies, private investigators could use to steal their information. So I founded Ilion, which was the first ethical hacking firm in Europe. So this founded another company in cybersecurity, which I sold. And all of this, I started in 1998, so it's been a while since I've been in that business. I've just sold my last company, so I'm a bit in between now activities, looking to do something more philanthropic in the direction of promoting liberty. But a key question that I think people are asking right now is, what will we make of this information age? What will the 21st century look like given the internet? And I think we can feel the tension, especially now with this new story that has come out, Edward Snowden and everything. A lot of people paint a dystopic future whereby government leverages the internet, leverages the information age to spy upon us and to take away our liberties. We are in the era of biometric passports, of biometric identification in airports, of CCTV and video surveillance. We are in the era of bloated, obese governments that uses every means it can to attack our liberties, to finance unproductive small elite. So we know this, we see how this is happening, but at the same time we feel the tension, and we can see if we are a bit in touch. Edward Snowden is obviously a hero in the hacker community on the internet more generally, and is I would say a mere illustration of what is going on. I'm not going to go through all these logos I've put here on the slide, but you'll probably recognize some of them. We are feeling that the internet is fueling a backlash against big governments, against tyrannical surveillance, against Big Brother. So this tension exists. People tend to be quite pessimistic and say, yeah, the internet is a agglomeration of porn and phantasm. These are epiphenomena, and government is going to win and is going to take over our liberty. even better now that it has the internet. So go back to the post office and to the type machine, writing machine, if you don't want to fall victim of that tyranny. I happen to disagree with that vision, and I'm gonna try in the 25 minutes I have left to explain why. So the first thing I think is important to insist on is the building blocks of the internet. How is the internet built? Most people envision the internet or see the internet as something very structured, organized, designed, thought through, that comprises a backbone, and that all you need to do is go on that backbone or cut the backbone and influence the internet overnight. There is a little bit of truth to that story, but the more proper, the more correct definition of the internet is a heuristic and dynamic conglomerate of voluntary peering agreements. It's true ARPANET was initially funded by the US government. It's true the World Wide Web was initially funded by CERN or devised by people working for CERN. But you should see these inventions as random inventions. It could have been any invention. That these inventions were voluntarily selected by the free market, by people around the globe, and decided to adhere to these inventions and to use this to communicate with one another. So nobody had planned the internet. People working on ARPANET in the 70s never would have planned, could have described what the internet actually turned out to be. Same thing for the World Wide Web. So the internet is a set of connections. If I want to connect to this guy because I have data to exchange with him on a regular basis, then I'll finance a peering agreement with him, or we will co-finance a peering agreement with one another. And then I'll be able to lease out that line to whoever wants to communicate through it. That's the internet. And then there are a number of protocols that help the packets find the shortest path around the world and along the internet, but it is not structured, it is not organized, it was never designed, it was never thought through, and it was never planned. So the internet itself, and I'm going to talk about obviously what the internet allows to emerge, but the internet itself is a formidable product of individual, unilateral, free human action. And this is very important to remember. 20 years ago, we imagined flying cars. We didn't imagine the internet as it happens to exist today. So that's the first thing, and you'll see how that is important later on. Yes, we do. Perhaps the internet will help you build them. So what is the internet today? How would one define what it has become in the most abstract and philosophical and general terms? I've tried to do this, but before I give you my wording and my conclusion, try to think of the internet this way. It is a medium by which people, while suffering a very low barrier of entry, it is very easy to connect to the internet, very low cost to use the internet. It is very easy technically also to contribute to the internet. So it is a medium of exchange which allows the exchanged good to flow freely. And I want to make an important point about the last singularity, something that happened in 2003. I call this on the slide editing, formatting, divergence. What happened in 2003 is that in order to contribute to the internet, you didn't need to have any more formatting skills. Before 2003, if you wanted to contribute a video or a text or an article or something, you needed to know how to put it online, how to format it, how to make it available for everyone to see. Working on the content or being able to produce content was not enough. In 2003, with Web 2.0, with the first blogs, with YouTube, etc., this changed. And now if you're able to produce content, you're readily able to share that content without having to master any special technical skills. So the entry barrier to get on the internet is low, both financially and technically. And the asset that is being traded free. So whenever this happens, whenever a market can be entered freely and the good is traded freely in an unregulated way, obviously the value and quality of that good increases exponentially. So if the good trade is information, if any new good, any new information is called an idea, well, the internet shall allow the exponential growth in the quality and the value of ideas being produced by humanity. So in other words, the internet is a distributed invention that dramatically decreased the costs of producing and delivering ideas. That's it. If you strip away all technical jargon, what is the internet for humanity? That's what it is. So is there any historical precedent to that? Has humanity ever invented something that has decreased the cost of producing and distributing ideas? I've tried to think about it. I've come up with 2 examples. If you have other ones, please let me know. There's writing and there's the printing press. So writing obviously allowed for the emergence of civilization, and the printing press allowed us to free ourselves of the political tyranny of the time at which it was invented, namely the Roman Catholic Church. This is a very good article that summarizes quite well my points. Here I recommend you Google it or Bing it or whatever. But it is a historical fact that Luther's pamphlets spread throughout Europe, much like social media micro messages spread in whatever latest revolution you want to think about. So the printing press allowed people to consult and contribute ideas at a much lesser cost, hence better ideas spread. Better ideas tend to be congruent of liberty, obviously, and of truth. Hence, liberty-minded ideas, truth spread throughout Europe, and in less than 1 century, Reformation happened, the Schism happened, and from that onwards, Renaissance and the Enlightenment, obviously. So, just by looking at this through this angle, it is possible to envision that the internet will exponentially faster and exponentially better emancipate consciousness, emancipate humanity of tyranny as much as the printing press has 500 years ago. So is there any proof of that? Is there any example in the world today of the internet having already produced such a result, of the internet already being proven as a real free market of idea that optimizes the emergence of better information, better ideas? So if the internet functions indeed as a free market of information and that it empowers the emergence of ideas, then the best informational goods should be the ones that leverage the internet the most. If we can find some, this means there is truth to this statement. What kind of intangible goods can we think about? Software, computer software. Computer software is an immense industry and is made of purely intangible goods, purely of ideas, purely of information. The most complex and large software that exists are operating systems, are the software that allows your smartphone, your server, your computer, your laptop to function. So let me tell you an anecdote before I explain what these logos mean. I was in 1996 in Huntington Beach at a friend of my parents. 1996, I was 16 years old. I was contributing at the time to the Linux kernel, the kernel of the Linux operating system. And the daughter of this friend of my parents was a very prominent senior Microsoft developer. And I would argue with her that Linux is going to overtake Windows, that Linux is better than Windows, that Windows is a crappy system, etc., whatever word you use when you're 16 years old. And she would say, but how can a system that is the sum of contributions of people whom you don't master the competence, who are not paid, who have no financial incentive, how can a system that is not organized, that not designed, not hierarchically structured, ever come close to such a powerful system as Windows that does not suffer from all these caveats that I have just cited? And a bit naively at the time I answered, because free markets work better than communism and then constructivism. And this, I didn't know to which extent this answer was true. Linux is an operating system, so it is this software that allows devices to work, and it is an unplanned system. A guy in 1991 called Linus Torvalds basically had the idea of calling out for people to contribute to design this. No particular idea of where that would end up. Now Linux and its cousin FreeBSD, developed with the same mindset according to the same principles, equips 90% of all smartphones in the world. So Android is based on Linux and iOS Apple is based on FreeBSD, and more than 60% of all servers in the world. So Linux in 20 years or so has overtaken Windows big time. Windows is particularly ridiculous compared to Linux in terms of stability, in terms of scalability, in terms of privacy, in terms of security, in terms of a number of different factors. So that's a first example. This is an informational good, a pure informational good that was produced to a better extent through this free market of ideas, which tends to prove that the internet is indeed a free market of ideas. Is there another example? Wikipedia. One of the Wikipedia founders said the problem with Wikipedia is it doesn't work in theory. It only works in practice. This is a true statement. He must have been he must have studied Keynesian economics or neoclassical economics, I guess. He would have understood that it also works in theory if you apply human action and free market principles to this kind of wealth creation process. So what about political ideas? If political thought is also information, is also an idea, if it is exchanged, distributed, contradicted better on the internet than on any other mean of exchange of ideas, then truth and liberty should prevail or should be more prominent on the internet. So how does the internet rate in terms of putting forward liberty-minded ideas and the truth? A very simple test you can do at home as well. Did last night. Try to Google John Maynard Keynes and try to Google Ludwig von Mises, and you notice that Ludwig von Mises, unlike what one could expect, rates much higher than John Maynard Keynes on Google. So this is not a definite proof that Ludwig von Mises is more prominent on the internet than it is in the Financial Times. But if you repeat this request on ft.com or on NewYorkTimes.com or Times.com or Forbes.com, you'll see a result that is altogether different. So I don't know if this is proof, but the internet tends to select out ideas that are true, and it's true there's a lot of rumor, a lot of fantasy, and a lot of everything is represented on the internet, but these ideas, which tend to be selected by that free market of ideas, tend to be the ones that I'm familiar with. So hackers, the hacker culture has changed somewhat over time. I'm going to skip a bit on this slide because I don't have much time left, but there's an interesting movement called crypto-anarchism, which would I would say pretty much represents what the hacker movement has turned into. Originally, hackers were participants in MIT's artificial intelligence lab. Now we're talking about crypto-anarchism, about Anonymous, and obviously still about open source software. So the values of the hacker subculture are information sharing as an ideal and practical strategy, freedom of inquiry, hostility to secrecy, and especially important distrust for authority. So hackers helped build the building blocks of the internet. The original hacker culture was in the Unix culture and GNU free software culture, and as we've seen, most servers run on open source software. All major protocols on the internet, whether DNS, which we've mentioned, whether routing protocols, were initially developed in open source free software organizations. So hackers is the hacker culture is intertwined with the internet. It is the principle that allowed the internet to emerge, and it is the principle that has empowered the internet to evolve. So what? Hackers helped build the foundations, humanity gets a free market of ideas, intangible assets improve in quality. Does it stop there? Does it further impact the real world? Let me give you a few examples of how it is already impacting the real world, of how this concept of individuals being free to exchange whatever information they want with whoever else in the world at whatever time and whatever location they are, in complete anonymity if they wish to, is already shaping a different world. So there are a number of laws. I call this slide anachronisms because there are a number of 20th century laws which have already become completely obsolete and anachronistic. And to understand why, you should understand that in this age, information is a number. Whether it's a music or a movie or an opinion piece, any piece of information is in fact a number. A long number for sure, but it is a number. So regulating the flow of numbers is like controlling the pronunciation of numbers. It makes absolutely no sense. And what are you going to do? Forbid numbers? Is 42 going to be illegal? 67 perhaps is going to be illegal? What about the square of an illegal number? Is it also illegal? It makes absolutely no sense. The only way to regulate the pronunciation of numbers is to implement tyrannical measures that will stifle wealth creation to such an extent that tyrants won't have any reason to be tyrants anymore. It means we are North Korea. If you really push the reasoning to the extreme, if you say we're going to control the exchange of information in this era, technically speaking, practically, operationally speaking, it means North Korea. It means you need to threaten people with the death penalty if they have a computer or any kind of peripheral device. It is completely unpractical. It is impossible to do. So other opinion crimes become impossible to prosecute, and all the activities by governments that consist in controlling information, whether through copyright, censorship, propaganda, become increasingly meaningless. I've other time put some examples here on the slides. I don't have time to go through all of them, but feel free afterwards to ask me about any practical means one can circumvent propaganda or censorship, or make sure they are anonymous on the internet, etc. So all crimes related to information sharing become null and void. The flow of goods is increasingly difficult to restrict and to control as well. I don't know who heard of Silk Road. Silk Road is a free anonymous marketplace on Tor. Tor is this encrypted internet that we've mentioned earlier, whereby you access the internet through a number of random relays by using encrypted channels. Very simple to join, very simple to use. It is part of the so-called dark internet. So Silk Road is there. The founder of Silk Road was just interviewed by Forbes, a very interesting interview, a staunch libertarian as well. You can buy anything from drugs to fake passports to guns to anything you want, except some items which the founder decided not to sell, like organs and pornography and things like this. He states that crimes that don't have victims should not be crimes, hence he shall help liberate the people of such tyranny. The picture on the bottom is a 3D printed gun. When there was all this hysteria about gun control in the US a couple of months ago, a guy on the internet said, okay, let's make a model so that anyone can print a gun using 3D printers. He published the models. He was sought by the powers that be, Homeland Security, etc. But the file had already disseminated. Today it's all over the internet. It's impossible to forbid, it's possible to restrict. A 3D printing machine is cheap and getting cheaper, so anyone can print his own gun today. This is just an example of how the information age is cutting the grass under the feet of the big government. And obviously, Hayek's goal of denationalization of money is also going to happen. This is the ultimate goal, because if you remove the monopoly, the monetary monopoly from governments, they don't have any more power to tax, to invade, to surveil, etc., to imprison, to kidnap, etc. It becomes much harder for them to finance themselves. So uh, Hayek's dream of competition among currencies is made possible again thanks to the internet. There were a number of attempts. E-gold, a digital gold currency that was closed down, people prosecuted, sent to jail because of supposedly alleged money laundering activities. Liberty Reserve, same thing. And then came the Bitcoin. The Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency, completely decentralized, with no central bank, no issuer, impossible to restrict. Restricting Bitcoin would be like restricting any kind of other information you'd have, again, to transform society into North Korea. So there are now a few investigations that have begun in the US against Bitcoin exchanging platforms, which will simply move to other more favorable legislations. So I regret I don't have more time to spend on this. This could be a presentation in itself. How are we going to free ourselves from tyranny thanks to separation of money and state, a century after separation of church and state, at least in Europe? This is very good news, I think, for humanity. So how will hackers help on this? Obviously by providing the technical means that will allow this to be done. Bitcoin was devised by a hacker. Other strong open source cryptography in the world were proposed by hackers in the sense that I defined them. A lot of the political mobilization, Aaron Swartz, who was suicided by the US government, is a very famous example of that. Hackers have the ability also of finding the arguments and proposing the arguments for the mobilization to take place, and open source software will continue to revolutionize the information age, obviously. So in conclusion, I think that classical liberal thinkers must factor the information age. Nobody is recreating Italian or Greek city-states. Classical liberalism can feed itself, can become more precise, more wealthy, more prominent, more compelling, thanks to these arguments and thanks to these discoveries and this new paradigm that has emerged in the world since a couple of years. The internet is built by and around the hacker culture, don't forget this, and younger generations have grown up with this. This is what was mentioned at my colleague's talk as well. This is extremely important. A teenager nowadays cannot necessarily phrase classical liberal thoughts, but he will tend to have this emotion of I am a free-minded, beautiful individual, and you government shall not tell me how to lead my life. Products of the internet and the internet itself are eloquent demonstrations of human action. Whenever anyone says now central planning works better than stochastic organization, well, Linux and Wikipedia are counter-arguments that usually close the debate. NSA-like scandals help precipitate privacy as a competitive factor. I disagree a bit with my colleague. I don't think that the Facebook issue is as serious as government spying. If you decide to, if you're dumb enough to voluntarily contribute everything to Facebook, that's fair enough. You make that decision. But monitoring that happens without your consent on your private property, on your telephone line, is altogether different, because the monopoly of government is there. And if Walmart has CCTV, I don't go to Walmart. If there's CCTV in the street, that's another problem. So these scandals obviously are shocking, but will help make cryptography more widely used and will help privacy become a competitive factor. Perhaps tomorrow a Facebook that establishes itself in Switzerland and says your data is safe here because we're not under the US legislation, maybe he will benefit from that competitive advantage more so than he did yesterday or 1 year ago. So in conclusion, the internet is emancipating consciousness enabling the emergences of free, self-actualized individuals. And hopefully with this presentation and these arguments, I've been able to convince you of exactly that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco. We will have a conversation with the panel.